A reminder, there is a change, as Joe said at the top of the show. Today, keep talking about the Dow Jones Industrial Average. It's different today. NVIDIA and Sherwin-Williams replacing Intel and Dow Inc., and it is effective for today's session. So when it starts, 9:30 this morning, those guys are in, the other guys are out.
I think that, I hope NVIDIA is not an allegory for the entire market, Andrew. And by that I mean, here we are getting in at $3 trillion. It's made unbelievable moves. Is it going to go to $6 trillion? It might. It might. We don't know. With AI, there's a lot of, but then again, there's plenty of room if there's competition or if it's not quite as exciting. If the futures aren't, I guess the future is bright for AI. You can't discount that. But here we are. And in the past, when it's happened, the companies have continued to do well, like Apple. I've just got.
But it's not like it's just in the market for the first time and the only.
But in the Dow.
Yeah, but it's. Most people, I think,
well, if it just stays where it is, world. Right? But if it just stays where it is, it's going to be an achievement. If it goes down, you know, every point, how much that takes off the Dow. I guess NVIDIA joins the Dow Jones Industrial Average today. Joining us now to discuss this milestone and what the incoming Trump administration could mean for the chip sector is Chris Kessel. He is Wolfe Research senior analyst, and anything we talk about in trying to handicap things, whether it's retail or things made in China, it's all difficult to discern what's going to happen until it actually happens in a new administration. What are you expecting, Chris? Well,
I mean, the first part is, as you say, as we knew from the last Trump administration, whatever we thought one week, it changes the next. So it's unpredictable to start. But there's really kind of three things that we're watching here. One is, further restrictions on equipment sold into China, AI restrictions, and then what happens with tariffs. And on the first one, on the equipment, there's already a lot of restrictions in place. And in fact, it sounds like, there were going to be more restrictions before the end of the year by the existing administration. But China is already very, very significantly hampered in what they can produce already. So any other restrictions from here, it's either kind of tweaking along the edges or a full stop, and a full stop hasn't been on the table. With AI, similarly, NVIDIA can only ship into China about what Huawei can do themselves. So if you put additional restrictions on what NVIDIA can ship into China, well, that's just going to move a lot of business to Huawei. So it doesn't have a lot of effect. And on the third thing, on tariffs, there's actually not a lot of semiconductors that come directly into the U.S. from China. As the example of iPhone, the chips are made in Taiwan. They go to China for assembly, and they come back to the U.S. in a fully manufactured iPhone. So, because of that, we kind of see tweaking along the edges, but not huge impact on the chip industry.
Chris, were you a proponent, supporter of the CHIPS Act? And do you think that it's been a success at this point? I know it's still early. And do you think the Trump administration is going to try, is this one of the things, if they do win the House, the Republicans, that they're going to try and reverse?
Joe, my view on the CHIPS Act was a bit mixed. There definitely was a real imperative to diversify production outside of Taiwan for obvious geopolitical reasons. The world woke up, so we're overexposed to this one country. That's probably not a good idea. And so the CHIPS Act helped that. However, as the money was dispersed, if you remember at the time when the CHIPS Act was being contemplated, it was about, automotive semiconductors being in shortage, and, we need to encourage investment. And now we've got way more automotive semiconductors than we need, which is often what happens when government acts. But the money that was spent on manufacturing would have been spent anyway if the CHIPS Act never existed. It did encourage perhaps a little more investment in the U.S., but even that, Apple knew that they needed TSMC to diversify outside of Taiwan. They would have made TSMC do it, with CHIPS Act money or not. But Singapore, for example, is a popular destination for new semiconductor facilities. Part of it is, it's friendly to business, it's low tax rates, and they incentivize their business too. So the CHIPS Act, in some sense, just kind of levels the playing field of the U.S. versus the rest of the world in terms of the incentives that governments provide for what's a pretty important business.
Right. It is industrial policy, but Trump has some things that at least look like industrial policy that he's proposing as well. So you said it was mixed. I think what you finally said was because other countries are doing it, we might as well do it to level our playing field, but we're not very good at it.
Well, yeah. I mean, all industrial policy, is the money being sent to the right companies for the right reasons?
You mean Intel?
Well,
they could use the money. Maybe we're lucky we sent it to them. It appears they really need it now. And our view in Intel is we're buying coffee again for their employees, so I got that going for us. Then tea, depending on your preference.
Within tech, obviously, you have to think about some of the companies differently. I think with Elon involved going forward, things like crypto or AI are going to get a lot more focus. So names like NVIDIA and less regulation, which will help things like Google potentially not getting broken up, obviously should benefit Tesla as they get treated more fairly relative to the unionized big three Detroit automakers. And so I think those are names that you think about and say, that could be a lot more interesting going forward than it was in the past.
It could be. They could be looking for the wider deployment of their own homegrown AI chips, known as Trainium. Getting a major foundational player like Anthropic to use them could reduce the number of expensive NVIDIA chips that they have to buy, and it could show other customers that AWS's own chips are up to par. But the information reports that there's a sticking point in a potential deal. Anthropic still prefers servers powered by NVIDIA-designed GPUs, as well as NVIDIA's CUDA software that AI developers largely prefer. Now, that is the training phase, or the process of teaching models with data sets. A source I spoke to, though, says that ultimately inference will be a much larger business. And that's a stage where the trained model is actually deployed to generate new information or predictions. That's where apps, including any killer app, will function. And that is where non-NVIDIA AI chips may have an opening. Even if AWS chips currently lag the capabilities of NVIDIA GPUs, they're pushing to make sure that there is product market fit with a key player like Anthropic. My source says that Anthropic is indeed optimizing for Amazon and Google, by the way, AI chips in this space. Now, big tech aren't the only players trying to find openings in this inference stage of generative AI. In the semi space, there's AMD and Broadcom, of course. There's also startups, many of them based here, like Cerebras, Sambanova, and Grok with a Q. So guys, on this day that NVIDIA joins the Dow Industrials, it is certainly worth thinking about this next stage and whether NVIDIA's moat is as strong as it has been, especially as the mega caps continue to have so much money and leverage when it comes to their investments in these AI darlings. Okay,
I thought what we would do, which could be constructive for our viewers, is take stock of the things that really worked this week. NVIDIA, let's just start there. 8.5% gain this week. It finally topped Apple in terms of its market cap, joins the Dow today. It's a new record high today. There's the market cap race between these two companies, 3.6T versus 3.4T. In terms of NVIDIA, you own the stock. So how are we thinking about something that obviously worked really well today? We'll start here with NVIDIA.
I think that the playbook was set up, that if you listen to Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Meta, they talked about spend, and we all know NVIDIA is getting a chunk of that spend. And so their earnings come out, I think it's November 20th, actually.
Yeah, it is the 20th.
Right? And so they're going to crush it again, and I think Jensen delivers the goods. And so I think after we've had these earnings come out with the hyperscalers who are just printing cash and then spending that cash, we know it's going to go to NVIDIA. And so I think this trade is going to last at least another few quarters in terms of people moving to NVIDIA. And you have the opportunity, right? The stock was between 100 and 130 for a couple months and basing out. And so now it's breaking out of that. I think it's going to break out going into the earnings.
That's basically how Jefferies, Brian, is thinking about it. They look at this stock along with Marvell and then Broadcom as having the most upside because of that. Exactly what Bryn said. The hyperscalers are accelerating their spend. They're telling you they're going to spend more. They're telegraphing what's coming. And to Bryn's point, well, where does the majority of that money go? Probably NVIDIA, with some others.
Well, I think Kevin said it best. We're going to buy the news. I think Jensen is going to deliver the goods. We're going to buy the fundamentals ahead of that. What's really interesting about the semiconductor space as an industry, we've been talking, a long time about stock picking, right? And the dispersion side of things has been increasing, dispersion of performance, fundamental performance, technical performance, valuation. So that really speaks to honing in on the issues that you want to be in. And NVIDIA clearly is the leader there.
Broadcom, you own Broadcom too.
Broadcom as well. And so then you got to think about, okay, so when is AMD going to get going? If you want to start thinking about stock picking and kind of getting in early, that's why we're kind of looking more and more at AMD, because maybe the next big performance push in 2025 can come from a stock like that.
Yeah, stock is had a decent week, right? With everything else, a rising tide is ultimately going to lift many, if not all, boats. AMD's up about 5% on the week. Kevin, you own NVIDIA and Broadcom.
NVIDIA for me is the best of times, worst of times story because it got entered into the Dow Jones Industrial Average today, which is a benchmark against our flagship dividend portfolio, and yet we're handcuffed from owning it because the dividend's like a rounding error. On the other side, in our growth strategy, we own it, and it's crushing it, and we're really excited about that. But it's going to make my job tough for benchmarking against the Dow.
Yeah, well, maybe there'll be a dividend story to talk about with this company in the future.
From your mouth to God's.
Right? I mean, I don't know. They're going to have so much cash falling all over the place that maybe they'll need to return some more to shareholders. We shall see.
Let's turn now to NVIDIA, pulling back a bit today in its first session as a member of the Dow, but still sharply higher on the week. Seema Modi has a closer look at the move. Seema.
Morgan, it feels like a long time coming, but NVIDIA joined the Dow today, replacing Intel, and shares were down slightly in the first day in the index. But we know NVIDIA has emerged as one of the largest companies in the world, but it took some time for that to play out. Of course, the AI revolution helping the company outperform. Remember, the Dow is a price-weighted index, so even though NVIDIA is a nearly $4 trillion company, it is only around the 21st most expensive stock in the index. Contrast that impact with the S&P 500, where NVIDIA is weighted at more than 7% of the entire index. While shares have rallied since the news, history shows us that additions to the Dow don't always lead to higher gains. In fact, Honeywell, Walgreens underperformed the stocks they replaced 1 year after the change was made. The reason? Well, a lot of analysts say most of these companies had such a strong run-up into their Dow inclusion that gains were likely already priced in. For NVIDIA, this means there may not be much more to gain by adding to the Dow, but we know AI as a way has been a powerful driver to offset historical trends. Look at case in point this week and this year, one of the best performing stocks, and earnings are less than 2 weeks away, Morgan.
All right, we'll watch it. Seema Modi, thank you. A lot of good context there. Let's bring in Mike Santoli for a broader look at the reshuffle in the Dow. And of course, Mike, it's worth noting, we're talking about a price-weighted average, not a cap-weighted one.
Exactly, and just to amplify what Seema was saying, here's where NVIDIA sits in terms of its weighting in the S&P 500 as the largest company in the world. 7.1% of that index. It's only 2.1% of the Dow weight because it has a relatively lower share price. And then you see Sherwin-Williams also entering the Dow today. It's only 0.2% in the S&P 500. However, it's the sixth most influential stock at this point in the Dow because it does have a much higher share price, good for about 7.2% of the Dow. So there you have the quirks of the antiquated Dow Jones Industrial Average coming into play. Now take a look at some more specific numbers on how entrants and stocks exiting the Dow have done historically. This is from Ned Davis Research. So this is the point at which a stock goes in or out of the Dow Jones Industrial Average throughout history. So you see those that are getting kicked out, they've been bad performers. That's why they get kicked out. On some level, there's a momentum representation type of story here. But starting a little while after they're out, they start to outperform again. Those entering the Dow, you see that they've generally been positive because markets are generally positive, not as aggressive, but they continue to do okay for a while. So it's not a pure contrarian call.
All right, I hope you're all doing great today. The S&P finished the day about 0.4% higher, and NVIDIA finished the day about 0.8% lower after having a nice run up over the past few days. The time has come. Hyperscaler earnings are behind us. The election is behind us. The November FOMC meeting is behind us. And now we have NVIDIA's next earnings report on the horizon. NVIDIA is scheduled to report fiscal Q3 results on November 20th. I've said it many times over the past couple months, and I will say it again. I expect NVIDIA to report great numbers, and I expect NVIDIA to raise their forward-looking guidance. More specifically, I'm looking for NVIDIA to increase their guidance for Q4 Blackwell revenue. We were originally expecting about $3 to $4 billion in Blackwell revenue in Q4. But of course, Blackwell began shipping out well before the end of NVIDIA's fiscal third quarter, as we got confirmation from multiple NVIDIA customers that they were receiving shipments of Blackwell. With this in mind, Blackwell production is likely ahead of the schedule that we were given at NVIDIA's last earnings conference call. And if Blackwell production is further along than we initially expected, then that means NVIDIA is likely to increase their Q4 guidance for Blackwell revenue. If they guide Q4 Blackwell revenue noticeably higher than $3 to $4 billion, then I think the stock likely trades higher on that news. As for what happens between now and November 20th, I don't know for sure. But I would not be surprised if NVIDIA trades higher into earnings, especially if the rest of the market is moving higher as well. And I think a market rally into year-end is very reasonable, as we have multiple tailwinds in the market right now. The election is behind us. The Fed is in a cycle of quantitative easing. And I would not be surprised to see market participants continue to go risk on over the next couple months, as long as nothing unexpected happens in the world during that time. As for the immediate short term, anything could happen. But I would not be surprised to see NVIDIA move higher the closer we get to earnings. But regardless of NVIDIA's short-term price action, I am bullish on the future of NVIDIA, and I would not be surprised if this company doubles over the next 2 years. Who knows what multiple market participants will apply to this stock during that time, but I think it is very reasonable for the underlying business to double over the next 2 years. And if the underlying business doubles, then the stock is of course likely to follow. The demand for NVIDIA's products is insane. NVIDIA has a massive competitive moat that stretches across the entire stack, both hardware and software. I'm not concerned about any tariff situation regarding NVIDIA, and I honestly think that is just short-term noise. We also have a very clear product roadmap from NVIDIA for the next 2 years. This year we get the launch of Blackwell, then Blackwell Ultra in 2025, and later on Rubin is scheduled for 2026. As long as everything remains peaceful in the Pacific, and as long as none of the hyperscalers significantly reduce their capex spending on AI, then I think NVIDIA should be just fine for at least the next 1 to 2 years. With that said, I want to briefly address the Supermicro situation really quick. Let me be clear, as long as the situation is unique to Supermicro, then I don't think it matters for NVIDIA in the grand scheme of things. If Supermicro were to stop buying from NVIDIA, then NVIDIA would just redirect that supply to one of the many other companies that are waiting in line for whatever they can get from NVIDIA right now. I personally do not want anything to do with Supermicro stock, but as long as the situation is contained to just Supermicro, then I really don't think it is a problem for NVIDIA in the grand scheme of things. At least that's how I see it. With all of that being said, I hope you all have a great weekend, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about NVIDIA in the comments below. Please leave a like on this video so more people will see it. And while you're down there, please consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.